Hey everyone, welcome in. Thank you so much for watching LX News. I'm Marcel Clark here with my co-host Ashley Holt and Nick Z.
Yeah, Marcel, and we're going to get right into our LX top 3. There are some new developments in the police-involved killings of Tyre Nichols as well as Breonna Taylor.
Yeah, so surprise, surprise, we've got one of the worst police departments in the United States of America.
So the DOJ is calling for an overhaul after determining the Louisville Police Department has a history of discriminatory behavior, including abuse, excessive force, and harassment. And now the DOJ is turning its attention to Memphis, where there are concerns about its history of illegal police practices long before the death of Tyre Nichols.
Yeah, that's right, and we'll have more on that in just a minute. There's something else happening in Memphis. City officials are now preparing to release an additional 20 hours of video and audio showing more of what happened to Tyre Nichols the day that he was beaten by 5 Memphis police officers for roughly 3 minutes.
So that footage was supposed to be released Wednesday, but a judge delayed the release. Both prosecutors and defense attorneys need to be able to review them first. It's unclear how long the reviews are expected to take, but this wouldn't be the first time the Memphis department released footage of the arrest. The department released disturbing video back in January, a few weeks after Nichols died. So some of you may be wondering why it's necessary to release any more video. Here's what civil rights attorney Ben Crump has to say about that.
We must have transparency to get to truth, and we must have truth to get to justice. And we understand that it's going to be heart-wrenching, that obviously that some of the video is going to show when they first interacted with his mother and father at their home and then at the hospital, and that the police may not have been telling the truth even from the beginning when they interacted with them.
Now, it's worth mentioning that Wednesday, the city of Memphis also announced it had concluded an administrative investigation into a total of 13 Memphis police officers and 4 fire department employees. 5 of those officers, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, Emmett Martin III, Desmond Mills Jr., and Justin Smith, are facing charges for second-degree murder, official misconduct, official oppression, and kidnapping. They have all pled not guilty. Joining us now to discuss this further is criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona. Bernarda, I first want to start with the video footage that we were expecting to see today. What questions do we still need answers to that you think additional video will be able to answer, or they're hoping the video can answer?
So my understanding is about 20 hours of footage, and that footage contains information as to how the family was notified and what they were told by these police officers and who actually spoke to the family members as to what could have happened. Also from there, we still are missing some timeline in the sense of what actually happened before the stop itself. So remember, the footage that was released about a month ago, or it was almost 2 months ago, you got to think you only saw immediately as the officer immediately took out Tyre Nichols from the car, but we don't know what led up to it. But we do know from law enforcement is that it was said that there was no probable cause to have stopped and pulled over Tyre Nichols to begin with, and that's how they ended up with the kidnapping charge.
Yeah, so the officers had claimed that he was recklessly driving, and then even the chief of police came out and said she's seen the footage and she saw absolutely no evidence of that. So that's what you're speaking to there. I do wonder, though, what it communicates to you, that every time it seems you and I discuss this, it seems there are either more police employees or fire employees that are being held accountable for their actions in this situation. What do you do with that information? If you're an attorney on either side of this, what do you do with that information?
So you got to think there are different processes. There's the civil process, which can lead to administrative charges, which can lead to termination, which is what actually has happened for those 5 officers, as well as other people that were involved. Aside from that, you have the criminal charges. And we already saw what's going on with the criminal charges, where these 5 officers have been charged with murder. In addition to that, we got to separate federal criminal charges as well as state criminal charges. So there's so many different parties and things going on in any given investigation. And to add on top of that, aside from federal prosecution, you're also dealing with the Department of Justice coming in to do an investigation as to pattern and practices to see whether this is something that is very common amongst the Memphis Police Department, and whether the DOJ has to step in and enforce some change in order for change to happen in Memphis itself. But that practice right there takes a while. As you can see, it could take a year, 2 years, even 3 years to complete that investigation. So as a defense attorney, it depends what part of the case are you handling? But really, you need experience as to all of the different aspects and exposure in order to best defend whoever it is that you're representing.
Yeah. And Bernarda, so I was going to ask you what the central question is for the DOJ, which you already answered. But how do all of those agencies communicate with one another, or are they all independent of each other, having to do their own investigations? What does that look like from our viewpoint when we're watching the news, seeing all these investigations happening?
So usually you want to try to make it independent because you don't want the analysis from another division seeping into your determination, because you want to make sure that it is fair and impartial. However, at some point there is some kind of communication, because you have to think, for example, the body-worn camera. Who has access to that? That is the Memphis Police Department. So you have no choice but to interact with them in order to get the information you need. So that is difficult in itself. But what the Department of Justice wants to do is to keep it separate, because there are different prosecutions and there are different goals. And again, you want to appear fair and impartial. So when you do issue a ruling as to whether you're going to prosecute or whether you're going to seek patterns and practices issue in that case, you want to make sure that the public believes that you're being transparent and that you're being fair.
Yeah. All right, Bernarda, we're going to have you stick with us in just a few. We're going to discuss what came of the DOJ investigation into the Louisville Metro Police Department. That was, of course, following Breonna Taylor's death. Nick, Marcel.
All right. Now, as you just alluded to there, Ashley, the DOJ has completed the 2-year investigation into the Louisville Police Department.
The investigation was prompted by the 2020 killing of Breonna Taylor, a black medical worker who was shot and killed by officers during a botched raid on her apartment. Well, no officer has ever been charged with Taylor's death, but several months after she was killed, the Justice Department not only launched an investigation of its own into the police department, it also charged several current and former police officers with federal civil rights violations. This includes lying to obtain a search warrant for her apartment.
Yeah, one of those officers, whose name is Kelly Goodlett, pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy. The second officer, named Kyle Meany, was fired by the Louisville Police Department, and a third officer named Brett Hankinson was actually the only officer to face state charges on a charge of wanton endangerment of neighbors, but he was ultimately acquitted. As far as the investigation into the police department goes, the findings were pretty concerning.
After interviewing hundreds of officers and community members and reviewing body cam video from dozens of officers, in a 90-page report, the DOJ concluded that the Louisville Metro Police Department has had a history of discriminatory practices against black people, including behaviors such as using excessive force, including unjustified neck restraints and unreasonable use of police dogs and tasers, conducting searches based on invalid warrants, unlawfully executing search warrants without knocking and announcing, and conducting unlawfully stops and searches. This also includes violating the rights of people engaged in protected free speech critical of policing. And as a result of their findings, Attorney General Merrick Garland also announced that Louisville's mayor and acting police chief have agreed to overhaul their practices.
Yeah, on Thursday, Breonna Taylor's mother also addressing the DOJ's report, telling reporters that she's not surprised by the findings because people have been complaining about the Louisville Police Department for quite some time now.
It's heartbreaking to know that everything you've been saying from day one has to be said again through this manner, you know. That it took this to even have somebody look into this department. I don't know.
Yeah, so surprise, surprise, we've got one of the worst police departments in the United States of America. And if we don't have the courage of Tayon Lee, of Tamika Palmer, of all the people that stood up and demanded change, then the Department of Justice doesn't just wake up one day and say, we're going to investigate this police department. So one thing that I'm confident in today is that we have a city full of people that are finally willing over the past few years to say enough is enough. Now, new administration, same problems.
As you saw, this is a patterns and practice investigation, and the findings relate to patterns and practice. It is not one particular case. It is not the 2 cases that we've had the honor and privilege to represent individuals on. It is long-stem behavior and problems within LMPD.
All right, so much to follow up on there. So we're joined again by criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona. Bernarda, I wonder what these findings change in this community, because Breonna's mother just said there that this does not surprise her. She's heard stories like this one before. So what does accountability look like when these injustices are proven, and who is responsible for holding them to that accountability?
So this is a completely different ball game. So as you can see, Merrick Garland did give a press conference earlier today, and he gave a scathing press conference as to the pattern and practices that LMPD had been engaging for years. And just like Lanita Baker had just stated, we're not just talking about the case of Breonna Taylor. We're talking about many cases that have endured the treatment by LMPD. We're talking about excessive use of force. We're talking about search warrants and illegal search warrants, but also racial profiling when it comes to policing. And what is going to happen now is that there's going to be a consent decree. What does a consent decree mean? Meaning there's already been an agreement as to what needs to happen, and that agreement is going to be presented to a federal district court judge. That federal district court judge is going to be the referee and is going to be monitoring the changes within LMPD and holding them accountable, because now you have a watchful eye and someone that you need to answer to. Aside from that, a federal monitor will be appointed, and that monitor is going to issue periodic reports as to what changes has happened, what updates are there, in terms of has there been training, has there been changes within the police officers, wait, are the numbers going up, are there excessive uses of forces? So there's going to be a tracking mechanism in order to guarantee that change is happening. That's why it's so important for the Department of Justice to come in and do a patterns and practices investigation, because you're going to see change as a result of it.
Bernarda, so often we see outrage after cases like this, and you have to see those frustrating videos. But I do wonder how we know that this succeeds. Like, you never really see as much attention on it when you have to start making improvements. Are there other police departments that have done a good job after they have faced a challenge like this and have been able to make the changes? Or are we as a country still trying to do a better job of creating, let's say, a path to improvement?
So the sad part about it is that we're having the same conversation every time someone dies at the hands of a police officer. It's like, oh my God, what do we do now? The same thing we've been talking about for years. Is about systemic change, so it's the same conversation. But in terms of what have we seen so far, so Baltimore is one of the cities that's also been under a consent decree, and there has been change in Baltimore, even though the crime rate is still so high. The problem is that you rarely hear about the changes and the positive change unless you have another police killing that takes place, or you're talking about $1 million settlement that makes the news for the day. It depends on what the media is focusing on. But yes, there will be change, because again, now you have a neutral party being a federal district court judge that is overseeing all of this. So you know what? You can't sweep it under the rug. You can't hide it anymore, because there's accountability to the public and to a judge that reports and will give these reports also to the Department of Justice. So you can face the possibility of having a federal overhaul of your police department if you don't get it together.
Bernarda Villalona, as always, thank you so much for your time and expertise. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.